Hello, hello, New Haven, and welcome back to Arts Respond on WNHHLP 103.5 FM New Haven. I'm your host, Lucy Gellman, and I am so excited to be here today with Og Stone, who is an author, comedian, musician, podcaster. I don't know, like, is there anything you don't do? Renaissance
I'm
man?
sure there's plenty. Yeah.
Um, talking about a lot of things, including I don't want to say a new podcast so much as a revived podcast and a Substack of the same name, and also, of course, your books, the most recent of which, Sporting Mustaches, tells 13 tall tales about the role facial hair has played in athletics and competition over the years. And I think I want to start there, especially because you are clean shaven on this day.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I should have. I think my fake mustaches are in the car. I
I
did
mean,
grow.
we have I have many feelings about mustaches, but I would
Oh,
love to yeah, I would love to hear how you got into this book. And you said you did grow and then I rudely cut you off, so I am so sorry.
I did have a mustache from Movember. It was the first time I've done Movember. I figured I had to with the book being called Sporting Mustaches. And my publisher, Saggy Meniscus, and I, we donated $1 from every book sold during Movember to the Movember charity, which is a great cause. It raises funds and awareness for men's health issues, mental health, prostate and testicular cancer awareness and stuff like that. So that was a really good thing to do. Um, I don't know. I shaved it off and I felt more like me on December 1st. There is a picture in the back of Sporting Mustaches. The one time I've ever really had a full beard was about 10 years ago. And then for the picture, I had like a really long 70s tash that when I was shaving the beard, I kind of like stopped enough to take that photo, which I love. It's pretty ridiculous. But back when I had the beard, uh it was cool, like because it was different. I've never been really great at growing facial hair. Like my hair doesn't grow particularly fast. And it was funny because most people seem to like it, except my niece was 5 years old at the time, and she hated it to the point where I was over my sister's house for dinner one night, and she reached across the table and grabbed me by the face and yelled, "You're not handsome," which was fantastic for the ego.
That's very, I mean, like that actually totally makes sense that oh, okay. It was telling me I was muted, but I'm not muted. Um that totally makes sense to me as a way that a young person would communicate.
Yep,
But I'm
both.
sorry also. Um, so I want to hear, I want to talk about multiple book projects that you've worked on, but since this is the most recent, how did you get into this? Because
Uh,
it's kind of like a funky niche subject.
yeah, I think that's very me. I tend to have a ridiculous idea, then have to pursue it, which I think my three works of fiction have all been those. And I actually wrote this one before I wrote Ballad of Buttery Cake Ass, which was my last book. Um, and I thought this might have some commercial potential. Sales have not really proven that all this year. I mean, a bit. Again, it is a niche subject, but a publisher was interested in it, which was great. So yeah, I wrote this back in 2021, 22, and I just had the pun of sporting mustaches, and I thought, what could I do with this? And I thought you get guys with really long facial hair that they can wrap around hockey sticks or baseball bats or move chess pieces with them, or like there's a tug of war in one of the stories where the contestants all tie their mustaches into the tug of war rope and then pull, which is just very wince-inducing. But it was a lot of fun to write. I'm big on puns. I tried to make it as funny as it could possibly be and work in as many pop culture and musical references because that's what I really love doing. So those are littered throughout. Plenty of references to the Beatles, the Kinks, the Police, Van Halen. Um, yeah. And once I started going, I got 13 of them, and I was pretty pleased with that, being such a niche subject as it was, and thinking what could you do with really long facial hair in sports. Like there are actually a couple stories. Soccer is my favorite sport, but I couldn't really think of a soccer story that wouldn't be too dissimilar, like dissimilar enough from the others to warrant its own idea. Like in the basketball story, the net is made of human hair. He shaves his mustache off to replace a net that went missing, and then he has like a sort of kinship with. He just cannot miss shooting on that net. And then I have another one where, the long mustache will block shots, and that could be a soccer goalie, but it was already similar enough. I do, I'm hoping I might have enough ideas for sporting mustaches too, because I'd love to come up with a soccer story. I also think a bowling story would be really fun. I have an idea for a yo-yo story where he rolls a yo-yo down a mustache that goes down to his ankles. And then, of course, yo-yo also get yo-yo ma, so you could have like a cello made of human hair strings too. So yeah, the puns just keep coming, and that's kind of how I write.
And have you, like, let's go in the Wayback Machine for a minute. Have you always known that writing is something that you really wanted to be doing? Have you always derived a lot of joy and pleasure from it?
Yes, but I mean, music is my first love, and I was always thought I would do. I have done plenty of music, but I've been really focused on writing lately because that's what's coming, and I've had more success with it. And it is nice, when I do perform, having people there. Um, but I remember I was thinking about this yesterday. Mr. Diedrichson was my junior year English teacher at Bunnell in Stratford, and I think it was either every Monday or Tuesday we would start English class with like a 5 minute free write. And I remember, I think that was like the first time I recall like being really into it and really just writing some out there stuff and reading it aloud. I was one of the few people who would read it aloud. I was always just really pleased with what happened. And then like like what I was coming up with. And then I did switch to an English major in college, and that got me reading a lot again. And then I was working at a bank, my first temp job after college, and I would just start having ideas and I would literally write them out on the adding machine tape. And like after a while, I realized that I had like you know, a story coming, like a novel-length story coming. And that's kind of how I got started writing, like just being bored or having ideas at work and like writing them down. And then my next temp job, I had like a lot of free time. I would just like wait for them to tell me what to do. And I started collating these more. So it's kind of just being bored at work, got me going.
And also, like, were you, I don't know, like at which point, because when you talk about these tall tales of like long facial hair, right?
Yeah.
I can't help but think of Memento Mori and that tradition in like the 18th and 19th century. So that's head hair, not facial hair.
Mhm.
But like people doing what we would now perceive as extremely creepy stuff to remember their dead relatives with their hair.
Yeah.
Um, and but at the time it was like incredibly important, right? And so I don't know. I think of hair as this like wacky, interesting medium.
Yeah, it totally is. I mean, it's constantly growing, which is, really strange. I miss when I had long hair. Yeah, I don't really know where it came from. It's just I had the idea one day and just thought I should explore this. And then it was a lot of fun to actually explore. And I did do a lot of research. I mean, everything is fictional in the book, but I did do a lot of research. Like in the 50s and 60s, facial hair was frowned upon in baseball because it didn't go along with like the clean cut American image. So it wasn't until like the 70s when you had guys coming along, Raleigh fingers, everyone always brings up when I mention this. But in the story, one of the themes of the baseball story is that he decides to grow a mustache for good luck to get out of his hitting slump. And management is very much against this because it was very much frowned upon, as it being going against American values in the 50s, which is interesting.
That is really, really interesting. And I know you just had a reading at the
Yes.
Stratford Library. How did that go? I unfortunately was sick for that. So
Oh, I'm sorry.
no, I just apologize. But how was that? I think libraries are also really important
Oh,
spaces.
totally. Libraries are fantastic, and I constantly encourage people to make use of their public library as much as they can because they're great. And like Hoopla now, like that's how I get my audiobooks.
And
You
you're
know,
on Hoopla. We'll talk about that in a second.
yes. But yeah, it's great. I mean, I travel a lot. I've been on tour the past couple of years for the books, and like, I listen to a ton of audiobooks. I have more time to do that than to read, and I get them through the library, which is great. And my, Stratford Library was where I grew up. I went there for as long as I can remember, getting books out when I was a kid. And then I remember when we were teenagers, and this kind of ties into the Ballad of Buttery Cake Ass, in that we just had this voracious musical appetite, and we are just like reading magazines and books on music and like discovering bands we wanted to hear. And the library was a great place to do that. With limited funds, you could go and like, check records out for free. And that just added to your, collection and your appetite for music. And Stratford Library has always had a fantastic musical selection. I've always complimented on them on that. So it's really cool, like being, at my library and given a reading, and people came, which was nice. And, saw some friends who didn't even realize we're back in Connecticut, which was cool. And yeah, gave the stories behind the stories and read the early history of the three-faced race story, which is like the three-legged race, but the contestants tie their mustaches together as well. And that's a funny one to read. So that was cool.
Let's actually hop into the Ballad of Buttery Cake Ass. So we will drop this under the interview. Brian Slattery had a great piece in the New Haven
Yeah,
Independent about a local collaboration with Sam Carlson, uh, through which you have recorded this book, and people can hear your beautiful voice on Hoopla, or probably Libro FM if they do that. But if you can get it for free, like do Hoopla. Also, if you live in New Haven, do Hoopla because every number makes the library look better when they're reporting their stats to the city. And that means we might get a better version of Hoopla. So, see, we're all in it together, y'all.
excellent.
Um,
Yeah, do
yeah,
that.
yeah, but Brian wrote a great piece, and we will share that. But for folks who maybe haven't read that piece or haven't read or listened to the book, can you talk a little bit about what the Ballad of Buttery Cake Ass is about? Um, because it's also about you falling in love with music. Or
Yes.
being in love with music, maybe the constant state of being in love with music.
Yeah, it's very much an ode to obsessive record collecting, which I've always been an obsessive record collector, and an ode to being in your first band where you have like these huge dreams of making it and like having this impact on music with a capital M, but not really having any idea how to go about doing that. Um, so the inspiration came from it was winter break in 1991, and my high school band, we went on a band outing, and we went up to the big city of New Haven. I mean, New Haven is, I think, 15 minutes from Stratford. I think I've done it in 11 before. But at the time, being, 15, 16-year-olds, we thought it was this huge trip, and we were always excited because only me and my best friends didn't have a license yet. So we had to rely on our parents. And then our bass player, Ed, had a license, which was great. And he took us all up. We went to Cutler's, and I was busy buying my first Fugazi and Captain Beefheart records, as well as the first Funkadelic album, all on tape. I had heard Funkadelic before. I loved them. And this came from like reading interviews with bands I loved. They had recommended these, and I was so psyched to get these. And while I'm buying these, I hear my best friend Brian ask the clerk behind the counter, "Do you have anything by Buttery Cake Ass?" Now, we used to like to make up fake band names to sort of mess with, records. It was all good fun. But the guy behind the counter, it was 1991. Alternative music was on the rise. New Haven's a big college town anyway. Bands would come through. So bands with like long, strange names weren't that out of the ordinary. So the guy behind the counter just says, "Is there any particular album you're looking for?" And without missing a beat, I just said the first thing that popped in my head, which was Live in Hungary. At which point the guy behind the counter got pretty confused and said, "Do you mean Live in Hungary?" And Brian and I got really serious and just shook our heads. No, it's definitely Live in Hungary. And as this poor man then just walked away to go check their stock for this record we had made up only seconds ago, like trying to hold in that laughter was one of the most joyous feelings of my life. And like it's a feeling I always try to recapture whenever I do comedy. And so 30 years later, I mean, I've often thought of Buttercake as I've sent Bri texts, as to like what the band might be up to. And I decided I should write their story. This would be a good thing to do, incorporating, all my experiences with bands and, record shopping over the years. So in the book, two best friends hear tale of Buttery Cake Ass's Live in Hungary album, and they set out to find it. And it's an impossible task because only 300 copies were ever pressed and most of those were destroyed. But they don't know this at the time. Along the way, they kind of meet two people who used to know the band, and they sort of pieced together the band's story. So there's two stories in the book. One is the quest to find the record, as well as telling what happened to Buttery Cake, who were a band in the early 80s, and they broke up in 1984. Um, and also at the end of the book, there's a 50-page discography of other fake bands that were somehow related to Buttery Cake Ass. And it took me an extra month to write after I finished the book itself. But waking up every morning just thinking of punny album titles, I was having so much fun. It was totally worth it. So yeah, that is Buttery Cake Ass. There's a lot of love into that, and I think that came across. It got like really great reviews from other fellow music obsessives who point got a lot of the references that are hidden in there and just got, what it's like to really want to find an album like in the days before, you could find almost anything, everywhere on the internet. And it's really weird. Brian Slattery also interviewed me when the book itself came out, like a year before the audiobook. And it was so bizarre. And he asked me if I had any holy grails these days. And I did. I just read Nicky Sutton's autobiography, and he mentioned that in the 90s he was living in Berlin and he produced these. He had a wonderful way of describing them, like two idiosyncratic. It wasn't wacky, but it was a word like that, like zany maybe, female duo called Vermoiste Flauten, I think is their name. And I couldn't find this record anywhere. And I was looking up the spelling to like email Brian back for the piece. Like literally, we had just hung up, and I Googled them to get the spelling right, and the album had just been put up on YouTube. So it's this really weird, piece of synchronicity, which was really cool. And I got to hear the record, which was, yeah, it was a wonderful moment.
And I love that, like within this world that you build, right, around Buttery Cake Ass, there are two really beautiful New Haven bookends. And sort of like New Haven indie bookends, one of which doesn't exist anymore, which of course is Cutler's, R.I.P. I miss Broadway. When there wasn't like a yoga store where everything was $300. Um, whatever. If that's your jam, whatever. Um, and then of course Sam Carlson and Sans Serif Records or Sans Serif Audio. So I'm wondering if you can talk about that and also like the change in music that you've seen during that time, or like how you are metabolizing that as an author, and then the experience of working with Sam. Because I love that you said, okay, how do I do this in a way that um, also like gives to the local creative ecosystem?
Yeah, Sam is awesome. I've had a blast working with him. I did in 2019, I was doing a comedy act called Young Southpaw, which is really surrealist, bizarre stories that go off on tangents. They take in a lot of music. And I was talking to my friend Bobby Berry, who used to be in the Pipettes, and he had written some music, and we were talking about like putting one of my stories to music. And I mean, he lives in London, so he had, sent me the track, and then I was looking for somewhere to record here. And someone, I think Carlos, who used to run the State House, Carlos Wells, recommended Sam, and I got in touch. And Southpaw is some people get it and they love it, but I have left a lot of audiences just blank on that because people don't really get what I'm doing. So it's very niche again. But luckily, Sam had seen me perform a couple times at Cafe Nine, so he knew what he was going to be getting into. And he mentioned this to me. I went to his first studio. He's moved a couple times since 2019, and we just had a great time working together. And then I had moved away like right before the pandemic, and then the pandemic brought me back. And then I had some more Southpaw stuff to record. And of course, I had Sam in mind. Called him up. We did a couple more. Gosh, we did 4 or 5 more stories, which have since been released, and it's always a lot of fun. He's very great. He gets it. So like he can, I can like trust his opinion. Like while I'm working, like, do we need to do that again? Like, or like, let me know if something, if I missed something or if I could do it better. So he's a very good sounding board in that way. So yeah, and while we were doing some of those early stories, he said he always wanted to try an audiobook. And I was like, well, I've got one I would like to do. And again, it was read in the Southpaw voice, which was how I originally envisioned the novel. When I wrote the first draft, it was kind of done as Young Southpaw, and then I decided, wait a minute, I want it to be a bit more me. So I tweaked it for another many drafts, but I wanted to read it in that voice because that's how I hear the narrator. And Sam was great. I mean, that voice, I could only do it for about 2 hours, and like an hour would probably be safer because my throat would just be raw and the energy like would be lagging after that. So
Yes,
we had
I
to
you
like,
can hear the energy coming through. I've listened
oh, that's awesome.
to some of this and you can hear the energy coming through. But I thought as I was listening, I was like, how did he? Because I had this image of you like going in and doing as much as you could do, which maybe 2 hours was that limit. Um, but I was like, how did he do this without just completely screwing up his vocal cords
Yeah.
forever?
I remember like we had booked like I think 2 days in a row in the first one, and it was just like, yeah, I'm not gonna be able to do this. So we had to kind of had to like, Sam has a studio which people are booking. You got to like work around that, which that's his business. But he would often have like an hour or two ahead of time, ahead of sessions, and we would sneak in there. And then, I mean, we started in I think August of 2023, and it was just like life was just like throwing everything at us. I think Sam might have had COVID twice. Like it was just all disasters. I got a concussion last January, which I'm still kind of recovering from, but like that kind of like put last winter out of commission. And it took 110 hours, like when I added up everything and like going in an hour or two at a time, that's a long time. And finally this June, we wrapped things up and finally got it out in August. But it was a lot of work. It took a really long time, but I am so proud of it. And I'm so thankful that Sam was like, I want this to be how you want it to be. I think if I was working like in any other capacity, if I wasn't running the show, I would have had to like maybe not cut corners, but I would have wouldn't have been allowed as much time to make it exactly how I wanted it to be. But every word we made sure was like, this is the inflection I want. And Sam's patience was amazing in that, and it was awesome, yeah, to work with him in that way. I'm really pleased with how it came out. So it's on my Bandcamp, but also which is augstone.bandcamp.com, but also it's on all the major. It's not on Spotify. I really don't like Spotify. I don't put my stuff on there, but it's on like all the major audiobook retailers, and you can get it from the library. So
Um,
yeah,
and with Spotify, because I've had this conversation with so many folks who are musicians and podcasters and authors and creatives, is that because it's just like Spotify is just this like big faceless giant from which you would receive a check for like 6 cents a month. And that's not an exaggeration. I've heard from musicians who literally are getting checks for like 10, 12, 15 cents a month.
yeah, yeah, no, it's awful. Like they don't. I've recently switched to Tidal Music, which pays musicians the best royalty, which I would encourage everyone to do. But I don't like Spotify. I never have. I just think it's evil. Like 'cause you can't buy through them, right? It's just all, and they make audiobooks free. It's like I don't. I think you should pay creators fairly. Like yeah, I don't.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Well, for folks who are just joining us, this is Arts Respond on WNHHLP 103.5 FM New Haven. I'm your host, Lucy Gellman, and I am here today with Augstone, and we're talking about like a little bit of everything. So since we've been talking about, working with sans serif, that actually just feels like a really logical segue into talking about music. I know you have, usually I ask folks, okay, like what's on the horizon? What are you working on right now? Because artists like don't rest very often. I find that artists are not particularly restful people, although we're good at telling other people to rest.
Yeah, no.
Um,
It's
but yeah, but usually they're like, oh, I'm working on these couple things, and then they'll name like 13 to 15 projects. So I know that you're working on music right now.
Yeah, I'm really excited. There's an artist, Damien Youth, who's been like recording home tapes since the 80s, and I'm shocked that most people don't know him. David J. from Bauhaus and Love and Rockets recently compiled a collection of 18 of his songs, and it's out now on Glass Modern Records. I don't think it's streaming at all. You have to go to Bandcamp to get it. And I discovered this last week because I'm a big fan of Glass. I had uh, their label boss David Barker on my podcast recently. I love what they do. And so I checked this out, and his songs are just fantastic. Like you hear bits of like Lou Reed, Mark Bolan, Leonard Cohen, a lot of Bowie. So it's ace. And it just got me like wanting to write songs again. And then I had a dream, I think Tuesday night, and I woke up. I've been trying to get up earlier and earlier because I find I do creative stuff the best first thing in the morning, like without any distractions. And since the new year, I've been just picking up my guitar immediately upon getting out of bed. And I had this dream, and then I started kind of singing what happened in the dream, and I wrote a song that I'm incredibly in love with. Like I'm still hashing out all the lyrics today. I recorded the music on my phone. I was just driving around, like, and I think I've got most of them. And then I had like another song I was playing with, which I think will make a good B-side. I texted Sam yesterday, or actually the other day, and I was like, "What's your schedule like for this winter? I'd love to come in and record at least one single, and I'd like for you to play drums because Sam is a drummer as well. He's a multi-talented. He plays guitar in the tines and just sings, but he's also a drummer. And I need the drummer. And we jammed a couple months ago. It was fun. So I've got those two songs that I'm just kind of like chomping at the bit now because they make me really happy that because I haven't done much music in a while. I've been focused on writing. So yeah, I would. It's going to be exciting to get back and do that. I also have another single planned, which I have the two songs. Um, I lived in Boston for about 10 years, from 1994 to 2004, and there used to be a club called Mod Night. Every Wednesday, they would play like, well, we called it Mod Night. It was technically called What a Way to Go Go. It was like 60s stuff, like the Kinks and all that, and like Britpop songs. And that's how I made a lot of my friends in Boston. And there were always these two young ladies who I never knew their name. They came together um, like every week, and we kind of like just like keep to themselves and dance or like hang out in the corner. And I would refer to them as the Raccoon Sisters because something about them, like I maybe like the mask of a raccoon, just like I don't know. That was my pet name for them. No pun, well, pun intended, I guess. And that's how my friend Rick and I would describe them. And I have no idea. I don't know their names. I don't know whatever happened to them. Um, but they were always like a staple of, that scene. And my friend Rick, who, the other one who refers to them as the Raccoon Sisters, I talked to him recently. I was like, we should write a tribute song to them. And I wrote something last year that I really want to record because I think it's a really good song as well. It's very much a tribute to those days. So I'm very excited about making music again. And I would love to start playing some shows that way too.
Locally or like everywhere. I know that you're someone who is like you because you have been on the road, you're familiar with that life.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, it would be super convenient to start playing lots locally. I would, of course, love to play elsewhere, but for now, it'd be cool to just find some places to go and play some acoustic sets.
and also
Or
there is like how are you feeling about the artistic scene in this like greater New Haven region right now? This is a question I ask folks all the time because I feel like it's changing, it's evolving in some good ways and some hard ways.
yeah, uh, hmm, I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't go out as much as I used to, but I mean, there does seem to be cool pockets of stuff. That's the thing about Connecticut that I've always felt we were overshadowed, like being between New York and Boston as we are. Like it was always, our major scenes. Like it was always very easy for bands to skip, like on tours, to skip Connecticut because you can drive between those cities in a day. So I was always really appreciative of the bands who would take that extra day. And like, that I saw so many great shows at Toad's Place and the Tune In when I was growing up. Um, it does seem like nowadays, like there are cool bands playing at Cafe Nine. Like when my friends are doing that, I try and go out and support. There's a there's a place in Shelton I went to the other night that reminded it was at it's a psychic. It's Madam Somebody's place. Yeah, a friend of mine's band was playing, and I just went to support, and like it was very much it reminded me exactly of the tune-in, or at least that half with the stage. Like it was really like deja vu walking in. And speaking of the tune-in, Tim, who runs Dagger Zine, who's been around forever, he had a book come out a couple years ago called "Where the Wild Gigs Were," which were kind of like tributes to venues that have since vanished. And someone wrote something about Toad's Place in it, which is I mean, Toads is still there. They don't, it's not
Oh,
like
it's
what
still
it once
very much
was.
here. I walked past it yesterday.
Yeah. So I was surprised to see that. But in the next book, I wrote something about the tune-in, because that was really formative for me. Like, yeah, I was in 1994, 1993, 94, 95. I was there every weekend, multiple times a week, most weeks. And, I wrote about that. It was a joy to write about that again. And it's bizarre, like looking at where the tune-in was. Like it's just like a brick wall now. I'm like, how was there ever like a thriving scene there? But there was. I was glad to, keep the legend going, as it were. And I was so psyched because my old punk band In Between, um, Christian Demena, who runs Lovecraft Tattoo now, who they're having a 20th birthday party on Sunday at Best Video. I can't believe he's been doing it for 20 years. That's great. He and Jim Pisaris, that was our band. And we that summer in 1995, we really pushed hard. And that's kind of like the music that Buttery Cake Ass makes. And it's the running joke in the book is that not that they ever sounded like this band who I've been talking about. Like I name a bunch of bands who they don't sound like, but who they do sound like is up to the reader. But to me, it sounds like the way In Between uh would jam like in the basement. Like we were really into like space rock and krautrock and punk as well. And our recorded output were punk songs. That's what we would play live. But when we would just jam, like it was this really sort of it was a big sound that I always loved. And I always regretted that we never captured that on tape. Um, but getting back to it, like we got to play at the tune-in at September 2nd, 1995, I think, opening it up for the Vandals and Strung Out, which was awesome. And then my band in Boston, Lifestyle, played one of the last nights before the tune-in closed in 2002. So that was a cool cycle.
And you
Um,
said it was COVID that brought you back
yeah,
too.
I I in 20 February 2020, I lived in Los Angeles in 2017, and I really wanted to like pursue stand-up comedy further. And I actually set up a temp job. It was like one of the few times in my life I've ever been like really responsible. I had a temp job set out in LA. I drove across the country. I was going to do that, and I was going to England in March to do my first couple hour-long sets over there or anywhere. And I remember the day I left, my mom was like, you'll keep an eye out for this coronavirus, won't you? I was like, oh, mom, there's only been 7 cases in the US. It's going to be fine. And then I get to LA and like I did a bunch of mics and stuff, but 3 weeks later, doing stand-up was no longer a possibility. And I hadn't found anywhere to live yet. So like when it was looking like things were going to be bad, I said to a friend of mine, I talking to a friend of mine, and he was like, if I were you, I would just get the hell out of here because LA is super expensive, and like with how crowded it was, like it just wasn't going to be a good scene. So I started heading back, but then like my family was like, don't come back here because New York was super bad. So I spent a few months in Idaho because like it hadn't really hit there yet. And I rented like an Airbnb. Like I really had nowhere to go. Um, so it was, but I was, thankful to have somewhere to sleep. And then I eventually got back to the Northeast in 2021. And yeah, I've been here since.
And do you think you want to stay at, it's an interesting question to me because I talked to a number of artists who are like, no, I'm gonna go to, well, usually to LA, but that's complicated right now,
Yeah.
obviously. Or to New York, or especially folks who are more maybe in the cinematography world. Atlanta is really hot right now.
Ah,
Um, and so, I mean, for you, do you feel like a sense of rootedness?
I don't. I mean, in a way I do. I have some really good friends here. By I feel my spiritual home is London, because I lived there for 10 years. Like the first time I ever went when I was a teenager, it just felt like home to me. Like I've always just loved British music and British comedy and the culture. Unfortunately, it's really difficult to live there, and I was fortunate enough to get to do it for 10 years. Um, I've been feeling a call to Nashville. I lived there in 2018, and I have good friends who are in a fantastic band called Taxiway, and they discovered me through my Nick Cave's Bar memoir. And they came to my Buttery Cake Ass reading at Grimey's in Nashville. It's fantastic. We've been, good friends since. They came up to Brooklyn last year, and we did a show where I did a reading, and they played, and then I joined them for an old Nick Cave song. And then we did that again for the Sporting Mustaches reading. I went down to Nashville, and I was just thinking like a place. I mean, I know people when I lived there, I would play music. Like I know people to make music with, but here I don't really. Yeah, so I would like to, ideally get a band together and do that. And like I feel kind of Nashville is calling me, and like having a scene there that I know the people in. I'm a bit out of touch with like what's going on here on a larger scale, but I mean I would love to get more involved now that I want to be performing more.
Yeah, I mean, it's also interesting. I hear from people all the time who say, like, I don't know how to find things. And shout out to Karen Ponzio over at the New Haven Independent because she just wrote a piece, I think literally called How to Find Stuff in New Haven.
Nice.
But that's true of Greater New Haven too. Yeah, peep that piece. So in our final time together, I also want to talk about the fact that you are bringing back the Counterforce podcast and a Substack of the same name.
Yes. Yeah, I had this insane idea to start a Substack like the week before I was going on tour, like the first Buttery Cake tour, and
Yeah,
I've
as
kept it
one
up.
does.
Yeah. I was like, oh, I just need to add to what I'm going to be doing on the road. But I've wrote it and like, it's usually once a week, definitely every 2 weeks. But I really enjoy that. I've always loved, enthusing over stuff that I hear or, read. So I've been doing that for about 2 years. It's augstone.substack.com. It's free to read. I don't want to charge anybody. I would love it if more people subscribe. That would be great. And then I did my podcast for a while, 2020, 21. And it was a lot of fun, but like I had just gotten a full-time job and it was hard to keep up. But lately, like this year, I was thinking I would like to start doing it again. I feel a bit isolated. I miss like talking to my friends in different places and people were doing cool stuff elsewhere, just as like a social thing. And this band in London called Fight Milk were great. They're indie rock, like really catchy, really good lyrics, a lot of fun. Um, I had them on the podcast for their last two albums, and they do great interviews. A lot of fun to talk to. And then heard they were putting out a new record in November, and I was like, well, I think that's the impetus I need to get the podcast going again. So I started it. I've had a bunch of authors on that I like a lot. Steve Aylett, Kevin Maloney, John Patrick Higgins. And I've had some great musicians. I had Fight Milk. I had Kimaya Diggs. I just had a band from Manchester, England called Chemtrails. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I've got some cool stuff lined up. Yeah, it's the Counting First podcast with Dogstone. I would love to get some more subscribers because a couple years ago the numbers were pretty good, but it's been slow getting it back up to speed. So if anyone wants to check it out, that would be much appreciated.
I think it's hard too because like everyone is a content creator now.
Yes.
They're like you meet a 4-year-old and they're a content creator. Um, yeah, so
And
it's
I
yeah,
Yeah, I
have faith.
try never to just have it be content. Like I'm trying to do it weekly, but that's the thing. Like with the Substack, like I don't. If one week I'm not feeling particularly like there wasn't a lot on my radar, I'm not going to put it out just to have content up there. Like I want it to be you're reading this because you'll hear about some great new album that you want to hear.
So one question I ask is like how do you in doing all of this, how are you also caring for yourself?
Oh, um, yeah. Well, the concussion like definitely made me slow down with things.
Yes, they will. They will do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, but I'm like 75, 80% recovered. It's been almost a year now. It was nice, like over the holidays just now. I just took some time and I like read some comics, which was nice. Um, and yeah, just like taking a bit of time for myself to do that, something I really enjoy. And I've found like I again with getting back into music, it's what I really love. Like I think I'm well, I don't want to say that. Like writing is just as important to me, but like music, has been there like ever since I can remember. And like picking my guitar up like first thing in the morning just like fills me with joy, even if it's only for like 10 minutes. Like it kind of sets the tone for the rest of the day. And like, I've only been doing it the past month, but I do feel like more positive about things and the songs have started coming again, which is nice. So like just taking a little thing like that and doing it like first thing, like prioritizing it. It's been wonderful actually.
I love that. And you mentioned comics. I want to say you also have comics that people can look at panel by panel, The Knowledge of Princesses,
Oh yes.
which is sort of like totally delightful. I have it pulled up on my computer right now.
Excellent.
But are graphic novels something that you really enjoy, that you've thought about sort of dipping your toe in?
Oh yeah, definitely. I was the comics editor for The Quietus when they started having that section back 2012 to 2015. And it got me, I really had to like get a lot more into comics and figure out like what I liked. Like, I mean, superheroes are fine. I've read plenty of superhero stories, but like what I really like is like European arty comics. So I covered a lot of those. And then I started writing for the Comics Journal, which was cool. And I just did a really good interview with Shelley Bond and Philip Bond. He's a fantastic artist. She used to run Vertigo in the 90s. She was, part of that, and then she ended up running it. And she's just got a ton of energy. And like talking to them about the creative force and just doing it and making stuff happen. Like that's up at the Comics Journal now, tcj.com. People have said it's been really inspirational to read. Uh, my friend Steve Horry, in England, he's a fantastic artist, musician as well. He's sort of, yeah, another jack of all trades, but he and I worked on a comic called The Beekeeper about 10, no, probably like 15 years ago. And the first issue, the PDF is online. People can find it. I think it's the Beekeeper comic WordPress. But it's a very surreal story. It sort of came to me when I was thinking about getting into comics, and I had an 103-degree fever, and I wrote this like just in a sort of altered state. And then I wrote a bunch of I expanded the script, and hopefully maybe one day we'll get to finish it, but like you can read the first issue online. I have another idea for a comic that the script is almost done. Looking for an illustrator for it. It is very much something I love. I love comics. I love the medium in that it's a visual thing. But it also, you can also get the sense of wordplay, which you don't often get, necessarily get like in a film. You wouldn't necessarily get a pun, whereas when you see it, you can definitely get what's going on with the play on the words there.
Sorry, it took me a sec. You would think after 4 years on Zoom, we all would have figured out how to mute and unmute ourselves. Well, I just want to say, like, Ogstone, thank you so much for joining me here. I know we've sort of jumped around. That's how my brain is working these days.
Mine
Um,
always.
if if folks want to find you, I think the easiest way is just to go to your website, which is ogstone.com. But is there a different way that you prefer?
And I think Ogstone.com is good. It's got a lot of stuff up there, links to pretty much everything. My Bandcamp, ogstone.bandcamp.com, has a lot as well. It's got the audiobook, and you can get signed copies of the books, and it's got some music up there. And then youngsouthpaw.com has like 65 stories of those surrealist rants if you want to check that out.
And that's also where folks can find under the live tab. Do you update that with events that are coming up? I know the reading was last week and the timing of this is of course like retroactive or whatever, but you update that as new things come up, I assume.
Yes, yes, I do. And
Great.
hopefully, if anybody wants to book me for a reading or an acoustic show, I would love to do it.
Yes, listeners, if you know some, maybe you are someone who books things, maybe you own a bar or a pub or an open mic or a space or a closet, I don't know, but bring Og in for a reading. Yeah. Ogstone, thank you so much for joining me on Arts
Hey,
Respond on WNHHLP 103.5 FM New Haven. I am so grateful that you've taken this time with me and enjoy today. It's sunny, at least where I am.
yeah.
So yeah, and I think it's warmer than it's been for about 2 weeks. So enjoy this cozy 37-degree weather.
Thanks so much for having me. I've
Yeah.
had a blast.
Thanks for coming on. Bye.
Thanks, Lucy.